Chapter 1. The Unwelcome Bride. The sun had barely risen over San Jose when Emily Tran adjusted the strap of her worn-out shoulder bag and stood before the grand white brick house of the Carter family. Her palms were sweating despite the early chill. This was the home of her new husband Daniel, and from today onward, hers too, at least on paper. The house looked like something out of a magazine. Pristine and immaculate, framed by trimmed hedges and a walkway lined with ceramic flower pots. It was the kind of place where everything had its order, its rules. Emily's modest upbringing in a cramped apartment in Seattle couldn't have been more different. She took a deep breath before pressing the doorbell. Moments later, the door opened with a soft click. Standing behind it was Helen Carter, Daniel's mother. She looked younger than her 60 years, her hair a neatly styled silver bob, her clothes crisp and tailored. But it wasn't her appearance that made Emily freeze, it was the look in her eyes. Sharp, assessing, distant. "You're here," Helen said. Not a greeting, not a smile. "Yes, ma'am," Emily replied, bowing her head slightly out of habit, holding back the urge to explain herself. She knew no explanation would change Helen's first impression, a poor girl from nowhere, marrying her only son. Helen stepped aside without a word. Emily entered quietly. The house was just as beautiful inside, oak floors, ivory furniture. Glass cabinets full of family china and framed photos, mostly of Daniel as a child. Emily spotted none of herself or her wedding photo, which had taken place only 2 weeks ago. "You'll stay in the guest room upstairs. Daniel will be back later from work," Helen said curtly. Emily nodded and carried her small suitcase upstairs. The guest room was spotless, but sterile, like a hotel room no one truly lived in. She placed her bag down and stared out the window for a long moment. Was this really her life now? Back downstairs. Helen was already preparing lunch. Emily rushed to offer help, eager to make a good impression. "Let me chop the vegetables, Mrs. Carter." Helen didn't respond for a moment, then handed her a knife. "Careful. That's a very sharp one." It wasn't a welcome, but it wasn't a rejection either. Emily took it as a small victory. The two worked in silence. Helen's movements were swift and practiced. Emily tried to match her pace, only to be corrected with an impatient sigh every time she added too much salt or didn't dice the carrots finely enough. "I suppose you didn't cook much back home," Helen remarked, not even looking at her. Emily paused. "I did, actually. I took care of my mom when she got sick. Cooking helped her feel at home." Helen's hands stilled for a fraction of a second, but she didn't reply. Lunch was served like a formal meeting. Helen barely touched her food, asking questions with the tone of a cross-examination. "How long did you and Daniel know each other before marriage? What do your parents do? Did you attend college?" When Emily answered honestly, 2 years. Her mother was ill and her father had passed, and she had dropped out of community college to work full-time. Helen's frown deepened. After lunch, Emily offered to clean the dishes, but Helen refused. "In this house, I handle the kitchen." Emily returned upstairs, her smile wavering. Daniel had warned her his mother was traditional, but nothing had prepared her for this cold wall of judgment. Still, she reminded herself why she was here. She loved Daniel, and love meant trying even when it hurt. That night, when Daniel returned and greeted her with a warm hug in the hallway, Emily clung to it like a lifeline. But even his arms couldn't shield her from the truth that echoed in her heart as Helen's voice rang from the kitchen. "Dinner's at 7. I hope she knows how to set a proper table." And just like that, Emily knew being a wife was one thing, but being a daughter-in-law in this house was going to be an entirely different kind of battle. Chapter 2. Living by the rules. The next morning, Emily awoke to the faint sound of dishes clinking downstairs. She glanced at the clock, 5:45 a.m. Her body begged her to stay in bed. But something about the house's atmosphere didn't allow it. She slipped out of the guest bed, washed her face quickly, and tiptoed downstairs. Helen was already in the kitchen, her back straight as she stirred a pot of oatmeal. The smell of cinnamon filled the air, but there was no warmth in the room. "You're up early," Helen said without turning around. "I thought I'd help," Emily replied. "You can set the table," Helen said shortly. "Forks on the left, knives on the right, napkins folded diagonally." Emily moved quietly, memorizing every instruction. The Carter family didn't eat breakfast with phones or the TV on. Every movement at the table was measured. No one spoke unless addressed. When Daniel came downstairs in his blue office shirt, he greeted both women with a kiss on the cheek. "Good morning, Mom." "Morning, Em." Emily's heart fluttered at the nickname. But Helen only raised an eyebrow and corrected him. "Emily. Her name is Emily." Daniel chuckled softly, oblivious to the chill. "We've been married for 2 weeks, Mom. You'll get used to it." Helen didn't reply. She sipped her tea, watching Emily slice a banana for her oatmeal. "You used a butter knife." "Fruit knives are in the second drawer," she said sharply. "I'm sorry, I didn't know." "You will in time," Helen replied. Then under her breath, hopefully. Daniel left for work after breakfast, promising to come home early. Emily offered to clean, and again Helen allowed it, though only under supervision. For the rest of the morning, Emily vacuumed the living room, dusted the shelves, and sorted laundry. Every now and then, Helen would point out a speck of dust she missed, or how folding bath towels in halves instead of thirds was not how we do things here. At lunchtime, Helen made grilled chicken salad. Emily tried to lighten the mood with a compliment. "You're a great cook, Mrs. Carter." Helen looked at her for a moment, then replied, "It's just experience. You'll learn if you stop trying to rush everything." Emily bit the inside of her cheek. The words didn't sting like they used to. Instead, they echoed something deeper, the quiet challenge of trying to prove herself. That afternoon, Helen sat in the sunroom reading, while Emily wrote in her small notebook. She had dreams of starting her own bakery one day. She had recipes, sketches, cost calculations. She never told Helen. There was no space in this house for a girl with dreams. Only daughters-in-law who followed the rules. When dinner came, Emily tried to take the lead and cook, hoping to surprise Helen and show her she could do it right. She made honey garlic salmon, sautéed asparagus, and rice with a twist of lime. Daniel loved it. "This is amazing," he said, grinning. "I didn't even know you could cook like this, Em." Emily beamed. But her joy was short-lived. Helen tasted a forkful, chewed silently, then commented, "It's different. We don't usually put lime in rice." Emily's heart sank. After dinner, she offered to clean up, as usual. As she was scrubbing the pans, Helen entered the kitchen again. For once, her voice was quieter. "You're trying hard," she said flatly. Emily looked up. "I just want to belong here." Helen's expression didn't soften, but she nodded. "Belonging takes time. And sacrifice." Then she turned and left. Emily stood there, hands in soapy water, unsure whether that was a small step forward or just another reminder of how far she had to go. Chapter 3. Between Two Worlds. That night, as Emily lay on her side in the guest room, the ceiling above her blurred from tears she didn't allow to fall. The air conditioner hummed softly, but it couldn't drown out the ache in her chest, the loneliness of being in a home where she felt like a stranger. She heard the soft knock before Daniel entered. His tie was loose, and his eyes tired from work, but the smile he gave her was warm. "Hey," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Everything okay today?" Emily hesitated. She wanted to tell him everything, the nitpicking, the silences, the way his mother's eyes seemed to say, "You're not enough." But she didn't. "I'm just tired," she said instead. "New house. New routine." Daniel nodded sympathetically. "Yeah, Mom can be a bit particular." She's just adjusting, too. Give her time. Emily forced a smile. Give her time. She wondered how long time would be. A week? A year? The next morning, Daniel left for work early again. He kissed her forehead gently and whispered, "Hang in there." It was the kind of encouragement that didn't fix anything, but made her feel less alone. Helen was already in the living room by the time Emily came down, sipping black coffee and reading the newspaper. No good morning, no smile. Emily took a breath. "I was thinking of going to the market today," she said softly. "I'd like to cook something for us tonight. Maybe something traditional." Helen lowered the paper just enough to look at her. "What kind of traditional?" "Vietnamese," Emily said, unsure if she was pushing her luck. Helen folded the paper and stood. "We'll go together." "I need to get groceries anyway." Emily blinked. That wasn't a no. At the local farmer's market, the two walked side by side in uncomfortable silence. Helen walked with her hands behind her back, head held high. Emily trailed half a step behind, like a shadow. When they reached the produce stall, Emily reached for a bundle of lemongrass. Helen stopped her. "Pick the ones with thinner stalks," she said. Emily looked up in surprise. Helen didn't elaborate, but moved to another basket. At the meat counter, Helen asked the butcher for a specific cut of pork, shoulder meat, boneless. Trimmed, not even glancing at Emily for confirmation. When they got home, Helen handed Emily a clean apron. "You said you wanted to cook." Emily blinked. "You're letting me." "Let's see what you can do," Helen said. "But no shortcuts. This house doesn't do shortcuts." Emily smiled faintly. It was a challenge, but at least it was an invitation. Together, they chopped lemongrass, sliced shallots, and marinated the pork. Emily worked carefully, asking Helen's opinion on how much fish sauce to use, when to adjust the heat. For the first time, the kitchen felt less like a battlefield and more like a silent truce. That evening, Daniel came home to the smell of grilled lemongrass pork and steaming jasmine rice. His eyes widened. "Whoa! This smells like home," he said, pulling Emily into a hug. "Did you make all this?" Emily gestured to the kitchen. "We did." Daniel turned to his mother. "Really? You helped Mom?" Helen didn't answer right away. She placed a bowl of soup on the table, then said simply, "She did well." It wasn't a compliment, not exactly. But it wasn't criticism either. During dinner, Emily noticed Helen eating more than usual. She even asked for seconds of the soup. Daniel chatted easily, filling the silence between them with stories from work. Later that night, as Emily folded laundry in the hallway, she heard Helen's voice call from the living room. "Emily." She turned. Helen was holding something, an old photo in a wooden frame. She handed it to Emily. It was a black and white picture of a much younger Helen, standing in front of a kitchen stove, apron tied messily. "That was my first week as a daughter-in-law," Helen said quietly. "I burned the rice 3 times. My mother-in-law didn't speak to me for days." Emily looked up, surprised. "I learned the hard way," Helen continued. "Sometimes I pass that same hardness down. It's not fair to you." For a moment, Emily didn't know what to say. But then she nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me." Helen turned away. But not before Emily saw her expression soften, just slightly. Chapter 4. When Fire Meets Water. It had been 3 days since the cooking truce, and the atmosphere in the Carter household had subtly shifted. Not dramatically, not enough to be called peace, but like winter softening into a reluctant spring, something had changed. Emily still woke early, still worked hard, but Helen's corrections were quieter now, less like judgment, more like gentle direction. Daniel noticed the shift too, though he didn't speak of it, afraid. Perhaps to jinx what felt like fragile progress. That Friday afternoon, Emily decided to prepare dinner alone. Helen had gone out to visit a friend and wouldn't return until evening. Eager to prove herself, Emily decided to try a more ambitious dish, caramelized pork belly, a Vietnamese family favorite her late father used to make. She chopped, marinated, boiled, and stirred with care. The sweet, rich scent of bubbling sugar mixed with fish sauce soon filled the house. She was humming softly, lost in memory. When the oil in the pan popped and splattered, one drop landed on her wrist, and she yelped, stepping back. In her panic, she knocked over a pot of boiling water. It crashed to the floor, shattering the ceramic lid and splashing hot water across the tiles. "Ah!" Emily cried out, clutching her hand. She stumbled backward and hit the counter. Her breath grew shallow. Her vision blurred from pain. Just then, the front door slammed. "Emily?" Helen's voice called. Then footsteps rushed, sharp. Helen entered the kitchen and froze at the scene. Water everywhere. The stove still on. Emily sitting on the floor, holding her red, scalded wrist, eyes wide in pain. Helen didn't ask questions. She was beside her in seconds. "Let me see," she said, gently pulling Emily's hand into hers. "I just wanted to surprise you," Emily whispered, voice trembling. Helen didn't scold. She guided Emily to the sink and ran cold water over the burn. Her hands were steady, her voice calm. "Keep your wrist under the water. 10 minutes, at least." "I ruined everything." Helen looked at her, eyes clear and firm. "It's just a kitchen. Not your worth." Emily blinked at her, stunned by the words. After bandaging the wound with surprising skill, Helen cleaned the kitchen herself, mopping up the mess, shutting off the stove, and tossing out the ruined food. Emily tried to protest, but Helen silenced her with a look. "You've done enough for one day." Later that evening, Helen reheated some frozen dumplings and brought a tray into the guest room. Emily was sitting on the bed, wrist bandaged, eyes tired. "I should be the one bringing food," Emily murmured. Helen placed the tray on the nightstand and sat beside her. "I once burned my hand trying to make banana bread for Daniel's birthday," she said. "I cried in the pantry for 15 minutes because the cake collapsed." Emily turned, surprised. "I was so angry at myself," Helen continued. "But Daniel, he was only 6. He took one bite, smiled with all his missing teeth, and said it was the best cake ever." A soft chuckle escaped Emily's lips. Helen smiled, too, small but real. "Messes don't mean failure. Sometimes they mean you tried to do something from the heart." There was silence. Then, slowly, Helen reached out and placed her hand over Emily's uninjured one. "I was hard on you. I know that," she said. "I saw where you came from, and I thought, maybe you wouldn't understand this family, this house. But I see now you understand more than I ever gave you credit for." Emily's throat tightened. She couldn't speak, only nodded as tears gathered in her eyes. "Rest tonight," Helen whispered. "Tomorrow we'll cook together again. The right way this time. I'll show you how to do the caramel without burning your fingers." And for the first time, Emily felt not like an outsider, but like someone being let in. Chapter 5. Small Steps. Quiet shifts. The morning after the accident, Emily awoke to the smell of warm ginger tea and steamed rice. For a brief second, she thought she was back in her mother's apartment in Seattle. But when she sat up, blinking against the soft sunlight pouring through the curtains, she realized she was still in the Carter household, only something was different. A small tray had been placed on the bedside table. A bowl of white rice porridge with pickled vegetables, a cup of ginger tea, and a neatly folded napkin. A note sat beside it, written in careful, almost formal cursive. "Eat slowly. This helps with healing. Helen." Emily touched the note as though it might disappear. Her chest swelled with something she hadn't felt in weeks, recognition. A few minutes later, Helen knocked gently and entered, carrying a bottle of ointment. "I'll change the bandage," she said without waiting to be invited in. But her voice was soft, not commanding. Emily stretched out her wrist, and Helen began her work, quietly, methodically. I spoke to Dr. Garrison this morning, Helen said. He said the burn should heal without scarring, if we take care of it properly. Emily nodded. Thank you for everything yesterday. Helen looked up, eyes meeting hers. You don't need to thank me for something I should have done a long time ago. The air between them felt heavy with words unsaid. But Helen didn't press further. She finished wrapping the new bandage and stood. Come downstairs when you're ready. I'll make lunch today. That day passed slowly but gently. Emily rested, and Helen handled the housework without a single complaint. In the afternoon, she even brought Emily a stack of magazines and a heating pad. As evening settled in, Daniel came home to the rare sight of both women sitting in the living room, watching a cooking show together. Should I be worried or impressed? He joked, raising an eyebrow. Helen smirked. Just learning how not to set my kitchen on fire. Emily giggled, and Daniel exhaled in visible relief. Later, as the three of them sat around the dinner table eating a simple vegetable stew Helen had prepared, the conversation flowed more naturally than it ever had before. They talked about Daniel's work, a silly neighbor who always confused trash days, and even one of Helen's embarrassing moments from her teaching years. For the first time, Emily didn't feel like she had to perform or tiptoe. She was allowed to just be. That night, as she lay in bed, Emily stared at the ceiling again, but not from sadness. She was reflecting. Something had shifted. Not everything was perfect, far from it, but there was a path now. A fragile one, paved with effort, wounds, and small forgivenesses. And for the first time since she moved into the house, Emily whispered to herself before falling asleep. I think I can make this a home. Chapter 6, A Taste of Home. The following morning, Emily woke up not to silence, but to the distant, unfamiliar sound of a mortar and pestle being used downstairs. Curious, she slipped out of bed and padded quietly toward the kitchen. There, in the warm light of dawn, Helen stood at the counter, sleeves rolled up, grinding something in a small stone bowl. The air was thick with the scent of lemongrass, garlic, and chili, a combination Emily hadn't smelled in this house before. Helen looked up and nodded. Good morning. Emily blinked. What are you making? Helen hesitated, as if she wasn't sure whether to be shy or proud. I looked up the recipe for gakko saot. I thought I'd try making it for lunch. Emily's jaw dropped slightly. That dish, Vietnamese lemongrass chili chicken, was one of her favorites. Her mother used to make it every Sunday. You looked up a Vietnamese recipe? She asked, genuinely stunned. Helen nodded and turned back to her chopping board. You once said you cooked for your mom when she was ill. I figured someone must have taught you those meals. I wanted to taste where you came from. Emily's chest tightened. There were 1,000 things she could say in that moment. Thank you. I miss her too. This means everything, but none felt enough. Instead, she stepped forward and gently offered, May I help? They worked side by side. Helen measured each step against Emily's memory. How long to brown the chicken, how much fish sauce to balance the heat, when to add the coconut water for tenderness. Helen listened, not just heard, but really listened. As the dish simmered, Emily shared stories of her mother, how she used to hum while cooking, how she planted jasmine in old coffee cans, how she never measured spices, she just knew. Helen smiled softly. She sounds like someone with good instincts. She was. She didn't have much, but she gave me everything. There was a beat of silence. Helen didn't respond, just stirred the pot. But her silence wasn't cold. It was reflective. When Daniel returned home at noon, having taken the afternoon off to spend time with Emily, he stepped into the kitchen and immediately froze. Wait. Is that gakko saot? Emily nodded, smiling. Your mom made it. He blinked. Our house smells like my college roommate's house. His mom used to bring this in Tupperware. Helen served the food herself, placing each bowl carefully in front of them. When they sat down, she didn't dive into conversation or fuss over presentation. She simply said, "Let's eat." The first bite hit Emily like a memory. The flavors weren't perfect, too much fish sauce, the lemongrass a little underpounded, but they were close. And they were made with intention. That made them precious. "It's delicious," Emily said softly. Helen looked at her, eyes searching. "Be honest." Emily smiled. "It's really good. You got the heart of it right." Helen chuckled. "Well, the internet taught me a lot." Daniel grinned. "I never thought I'd see this day." Later that afternoon, as they cleaned up the dishes together, Helen asked, out of nowhere, "Is your mother still ill?" Emily paused. It was the first time Helen had ever mentioned her mother. "She passed away 2 years ago," she said, voice calm. "Cancer." Helen's hands stopped mid-scrub. "I'm sorry." "Thank you." Another quiet pause. Then Helen said, still looking at the sink, "You must have learned to be strong very early." Emily swallowed. "I didn't have much choice." Helen finally turned to look at her. "I think that strength is something I've misjudged. I saw your background and thought it made you weak. But maybe it made you braver than I ever gave you credit for." Emily didn't know what to say. All she could do was nod, and in that moment, they stood not as mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, but as two women who had both lost mothers, both shaped by grief and survival. And in the quiet that followed, something passed between them. Something real. Chapter 7. When Blood Speaks Cruel Words. It was a rare Sunday when the Carter household buzzed with visitors. Daniel's aunt, Margaret, Helen's older sister, and her husband had come down from Sacramento to see how the newlyweds were doing. From the moment she stepped in, Margaret's eyes scanned Emily from head to toe like she was appraising second-hand furniture. "So this is the little wife Daniel picked," she said as she settled on the living room couch, adjusting her pearl necklace with a smug smile. Emily smiled politely, hands clasped on her lap. "She's very petite," Margaret continued. "Daniel always did have a soft spot for gentle girls. Though I must say, she looks more like a waitress than a Carter." Emily felt the sting, but didn't flinch. This wasn't the first time she'd been spoken down to, it was just the first time it happened in a home she was trying so hard to make hers. "I used to waitress," she answered calmly. "It paid for my mother's hospital bills." There was silence. Margaret blinked, then raised an eyebrow. "Oh my. So the girl has a backbone." Helen, who had been arranging cups in the kitchen, froze. Her fingers tightened around the china. "I heard she didn't even finish college," Margaret whispered loudly to her husband, making no attempt to be discreet. "Daniel could have married a doctor's daughter. Or at least someone with a proper degree. It's not too late for annulments, you know." That was when Helen stepped out from the kitchen. Her voice, cool and clipped, sliced through the room. "Enough, Margaret." Everyone turned. Helen rarely raised her voice, rarely interrupted, but now her eyes were steel. "I invited you here as family, not as critics," she continued. "If you're here to insult my daughter-in-law in my house, then perhaps you've overstayed your welcome." Margaret looked stunned. But Helen didn't let her finish. "You may not approve of Emily, but I do. She has more strength, grace, and kindness than many people born with silver spoons in their mouths." Emily's eyes widened. It was the first time Helen had ever called her daughter-in-law out loud, and the first time she defended her so openly. "She is part of this family now," Helen finished, voice unwavering. "And I won't have her made to feel less than." Margaret sputtered for a moment, then stood abruptly. "Well, clearly I've said too much." Helen didn't reply. Margaret and her husband left in tight silence. After the door shut behind them, the house fell quiet. Emily stood still, heart pounding. Helen turned to her, and for a moment, she looked unsure, as if surprised at her own outburst. I'm sorry you had to hear that, she said, softly this time. She's always been like that, even to me. But today, I couldn't stay silent. Emily took a step forward. You didn't have to do that. I did, Helen said, her eyes glinting. You've done nothing but try. You've given more than anyone expected. And I see it now, I truly see it. Emily's throat tightened. Thank you. Helen looked away for a moment, composing herself. You don't need to thank me for treating you like family. I should have done that from the start. Just then, Daniel walked in, having returned from running errands, oblivious to the storm that had passed. Everything okay? He asked, glancing between them. Helen gave Emily a knowing look, then smiled. Better than ever. Emily smiled back. And, for the first time, when Helen reached out to straighten the collar of her sweater, like a mother would, Emily didn't tense. She let her. Chapter 8. When care flows the other way. It was just a small stumble. Helen had been reaching for the top shelf in the pantry, trying to grab a jar of preserved lemons for a new recipe she'd wanted to try. Emily had gone out briefly to pick up groceries, and the house was quiet, too quiet for anyone to notice when the step stool slipped. Helen hit the floor with a muffled thud. By the time Emily returned home, humming softly with a tote bag over her arm, she found Helen sitting on the kitchen floor, back braced against a cabinet, one hand clutching her ankle and her breath shallow. Mrs. Carter, Helen. Emily dropped everything and rushed over. Helen looked up, face pale but composed. I'm fine. Just twisted it. But the way she winced when Emily tried to help her up said otherwise. Daniel arrived home minutes later and drove them straight to urgent care. The doctor confirmed it was a sprain, nothing broken, but enough to warrant crutches and several days of rest. That night, Helen was confined to the downstairs bedroom, leg elevated and dignity slightly bruised. Emily brought in tea and painkillers without a word, then sat by the bed, unsure how to break the silence. Helen had never liked being vulnerable, especially not like this. I know it's just a sprain, Helen muttered, eyes on the ceiling, but being taken care of feels strange. Emily smiled gently. Now you know how I felt in the hospital. Helen glanced at her, lips tugging into a smirk. Touché. Over the next few days, Emily became the caregiver. She prepared meals, kept Helen's foot iced, brought books from the library, and even styled her hair in the mornings with surprising skill. The roles had reversed, but instead of discomfort, the change brought an unexpected intimacy. One evening, as they sat watching an old cooking show rerun on TV, Helen asked quietly, Do you ever think about your mother? Emily looked up. Every day. Helen nodded slowly. Was she kind? She was everything, Emily said. She gave even when she had nothing left. She used to say, care is the language of love when words fall short. Helen's throat moved. She didn't speak for a moment. Then, softly, I didn't know how to care for someone like you, Emily. You reminded me too much of everything I used to dismiss, humility, softness, emotion. But you've taught me those things aren't weaknesses. Emily reached forward and gently adjusted Helen's blanket. You taught me too, she whispered. That strength doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it's just showing up again the next day. A silence settled between them, but it was warm, solid, healed. Just then, Daniel peeked in with a bowl of freshly sliced apples. Ladies, he grinned. How's my favorite duo doing? We're plotting against you, Helen said with mock severity. Emily giggled. And we're winning. They all laughed. Later that night, as Emily tucked the blanket around Helen one last time, Helen reached for her hand. Thank you, she said, eyes glinting. For taking care of me. For staying. Emily squeezed her hand gently. Your family. I'm not going anywhere. Chapter 9. 2 Heartbeats. The morning light filtered softly through the lace curtains of the kitchen window as Emily poured a cup of chamomile tea, her hands trembling just slightly. She had barely slept the night before. The white envelope from the clinic sat on the table, unopened but already whispering its secrets. Emily had gone in for a routine check after feeling dizzy for days, her appetite unpredictable, and a strange warmth blooming in her chest every time she touched her belly. Now, with the air quiet and Helen still resting upstairs, Emily finally opened the envelope. She read the words once, then again, and again. Pregnancy confirmed, estimated 7 weeks. Multiple fetal heartbeats detected. Her hands flew to her mouth. She was pregnant. Again. And not just with one baby, too. Tears streamed down her cheeks, tears of shock, of fear, of overwhelming joy. After the loss she'd suffered months ago, Emily had tried not to hope too soon. But now, with new life stirring inside her, that hope rose like sunlight over a stormy sea. She stood frozen in the kitchen, holding the paper like it might dissolve if she let go. A soft voice broke the silence. "Emily?" She turned around. Helen stood in the hallway, one hand still resting on her crutch, eyes curious. "Are you okay?" Emily tried to speak, but the lump in her throat caught her. Helen crossed the room slowly, concerned. "What's wrong?" Emily couldn't say it out loud. So instead, she held out the envelope. Helen took it, brows furrowing as she read. Her mouth parted slightly in disbelief. And then, the silence broke. "You're pregnant." Emily nodded, eyes brimming. "Twins." Helen gasped, a small, genuine sound. She looked from the paper to Emily, then slowly stepped forward, tears welling in her own eyes. For a moment, neither woman moved. Then, as if some invisible barrier crumbled between them, Helen wrapped her arms around Emily in a full embrace, tight, warm, real. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. 2 heartbeats. 2 little miracles. Emily buried her face into Helen's shoulder, trembling. "I was so scared. I didn't know if I could carry again." "You're not alone this time," Helen said, holding her close. "You won't lift a single pan, climb a single stair, or carry one grocery bag. I'll make sure of it." They stood there in the quiet kitchen, the older woman holding the younger like a mother would her daughter, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Later that day, Daniel came home and found the 2 of them sitting on the back porch, holding hands and sipping warm broth. The air was filled with quiet laughter, soft plans, and a dozen what-ifs. When Emily shared the news with him, Daniel dropped the groceries he was holding and just stared at her. "You're serious?" She nodded. "And it's twins." Daniel blinked, laughed in disbelief, and pulled her into his arms. "I'm going to faint." "You better not," Helen warned with a smirk. "We'll need both of you." That night, as Helen sat alone in her room, she took out a small photo album from her drawer. Tucked in the back was a black and white sonogram from when she was pregnant with Daniel. She smiled, tracing it with her fingertip. She had raised one good man. Now she would help raise 2 more children, grandchildren, alongside the woman who had taught her how to love again. Chapter 10. A Room of Their Own. The next morning, Helen woke earlier than usual. There was a quiet energy in the air, something that hadn't been in the Carter home for a long time, not since Daniel was a child. A new beginning was stirring in every corner, and Helen, for once, let herself feel it. After breakfast, she stepped into the room at the end of the hallway, the one that had served as a guest room for years. White walls, plain curtains, and a simple bed. But as she stood there now, she didn't see a guest room. She saw cribs. She saw pastel mobiles dangling from the ceiling. She saw shelves filled with picture books and stuffed animals, 2 tiny names carved into wooden plaques. "A nursery. Emily," she called softly. Emily appeared at the door, rubbing her belly instinctively, though there was barely a bump. Helen turned to her. "I was thinking, this could be their room." Emily blinked. "Really?" Helen nodded. It's close to ours, and it gets the morning sun. I want them to wake up to light. A lump formed in Emily's throat. That's beautiful. They began planning together. At first, Emily hesitated, accustomed to staying quiet, always waiting for permission. But Helen gently nudged her with questions. What color curtains do you like? Should we do a forest theme or something simpler? I saw a crib set online, but maybe you'd prefer something handmade? Emily quickly found herself swept into it, creating mood boards on her phone, sketching wall patterns on scratch paper, and giggling when Helen vetoed anything with too much glitter. That afternoon, they visited a local baby store. Helen moved with unexpected precision, testing the safety of crib frames, comparing mattress firmness, and scoffing at overpriced bottle sterilizers. I raised Daniel without half of these gadgets, she muttered. And he turned out fine, mostly. Emily laughed. You're going to spoil them, aren't you? Helen raised an eyebrow. That depends. Do they take after their father or their mother? Emily grinned. Hopefully the best of both. They returned home with bags full of tiny socks, storybooks, and a soft cloud-shaped nightlight that Helen insisted on for dream protection. As they unpacked together in the soon-to-be nursery, Helen paused, holding a tiny onesie in her hand. She sat down slowly on the bed and looked at Emily. I wasn't a gentle mother, she said. I pushed Daniel. I worried that if I didn't, the world would swallow him whole. I forgot that the world would also offer him love if I let it. Emily sat beside her, silent. I saw you as a threat, Helen confessed. Not because you were unworthy, but because you reminded me of everything I thought didn't matter. Feelings, softness, faith in people. Helen's voice cracked. But I was wrong. You matter. You always did. I just couldn't see it through my own fear. Emily reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. I never needed you to be perfect, she said. I just needed a chance. Helen looked at her, and for the first time, she didn't see her as Daniel's wife or a girl from a modest background. She saw her as a woman, a mother-to-be, and her daughter. The evening ended with the two of them seated on the nursery floor, laughing as they failed to assemble a self-locking bookshelf. The instructions were upside down, screws missing, and at one point, a wooden peg flew across the room. We'll get there, Helen said, wiping tears of laughter from her eyes. Emily smiled. We already have. And as the last light of day spilled through the window onto the crib boxes, fabric swatches, and two women closer than ever, the room no longer felt empty. It felt like the beginning of everything. Chapter 11. Beneath the Quiet. By week 10 of her pregnancy, Emily had begun to feel it. The constant fatigue, the waves of nausea, the way her joints ached even after short walks. Carrying twins, as the doctor warned, would not be gentle on her body. One morning, she tried to make breakfast, but halfway through slicing strawberries, she leaned over the sink and vomited, shaking. Helen, who had just come downstairs with a laundry basket in hand, dropped everything. She was at Emily's side in seconds, rubbing slow circles on her back. Breathe through your nose. You're okay. Let's get you sitting down. Emily was pale, hands trembling slightly. I thought it would pass. Helen gently wiped her mouth with a warm cloth, then helped her into the living room. She returned moments later with mint tea and a small plate of dry toast. I read that bland carbs help, she said. No more kitchen work, understand? Emily gave a tired smile. I feel useless. Helen scoffed. You're growing two humans. That's full-time work. From that day forward, Helen took over the household. Breakfast was ready each morning, light, nourishing, warm. Lunch was served on a tray with herbal tea. And dinner always came with a reminder. No lifting, no cleaning, no standing longer than 10 minutes. Emily had never been taken care of like this before. It felt foreign and humbling. One evening, as she sat on the porch wrapped in a shawl, sipping broth under the gentle autumn sky, Helen joined her with 2 steaming mugs of ginger tea. They sat in silence for a while, watching golden leaves fall. Then Helen said quietly, "I was pregnant once. Before Daniel." Emily turned to her, surprised. Helen had never mentioned it before. "I lost her at 16 weeks, Helen continued, her voice steady but soft. "Her name would have been Claire. I still think about her sometimes, who she might have been. If she would have had Daniel's smile or my stubborn streak." Emily's heart clenched. "I'm so sorry." Helen nodded slowly. "It's been over 30 years, and it still sits in a corner of me. That's the thing about motherhood. Whether you hold the baby in your arms or only in your heart, they change you." Emily reached out and gently took Helen's hand. They stayed like that, fingers intertwined, the silence between them thick with understanding. "I think she would have been proud of you," Emily whispered. Helen looked at her, eyes glistening. "And I think she would have liked you very much." That night, when Emily went to bed, she placed her hands over her belly and whispered, "You have a grandmother who loves you fiercely. And she's learning to love me, too." In the next room, Helen sat at her desk, pulling open a drawer she rarely touched. Inside was an old, faded envelope addressed to Claire. She took it out, read it once more, then folded it back carefully and returned it to its place. But this time, she didn't close the drawer all the way. Because some memories deserve to breathe. Chapter 12. Threads of Love. The sound of a sewing machine hummed gently in the Carter house that afternoon. A rhythmic lull that floated from the study to the hallway like a song only the walls could hum along to. Inside, Helen sat at her old Singer machine, reading glasses perched low on her nose. Lips pursed in concentration. A pile of soft cotton fabric lay neatly folded beside her, mint green, pale yellow, and cream, colors she had once chosen for Daniel and now again for 2 new lives. She fed the fabric carefully under the needle, guiding each seam with deliberate care. No commercial tags. No factory perfection. Just her hands and a heart full of quiet resolve. "Making anything dangerous?" Daniel teased as he peeked in, arms crossed. Helen smirked without looking up. "Only the world's tiniest shirt, with the world's most crooked collar." Daniel laughed. "They'll love it anyway." Helen paused for a moment, then said softly, "I never made clothes for you, you know. Not like this. I was always too busy working, worrying. I bought what was practical, not what was soft." "You did your best," Daniel replied gently. "I want to do more than my best this time," she whispered. "I want to do it right." In the next room, Emily sat at her writing desk. A small notebook open in front of her. The words came slowly, not because she didn't know what to say, but because every word felt like a promise. At the top of the page, she wrote, "To my little ones, before I meet you." Her hand moved across the paper. Asterisk, "I don't know your names yet. I don't even know if you'll look more like your dad or have my nose. But I already know this. You are loved. Not just by me and your father, but by a woman who once didn't know how to let love in. A woman who now watches over you as if you were her own heartbeat." Asterisk. By the time you read this, you'll probably be rolling your eyes. That's okay. Just know that before you ever opened your eyes, you opened ours. Emily paused, tears slipping down her cheeks as she smiled. She closed the notebook and tucked it gently into the drawer beside her prenatal vitamins and baby name ideas. That evening, as the sun began to dip behind the backyard trees, Helen knocked lightly on her door. "I have something," she said. Emily opened the door and was greeted by the sight of 2 tiny matching shirts, handmade, complete with mismatched buttons and slightly uneven hems. "They're not perfect," Helen said quickly, almost shy, "but they're stitched with something close." Emily took the shirts in her hands, pressing them to her chest. "They're beautiful," she said, her voice trembling. Helen smiled, then held up 2 tiny beanies. Bonus round. They both laughed. Later, as they sat together in the nursery folding clothes, arranging the shelves, and labeling drawers, they talked about lullabies, baby soap, and whether twins would share a crib or need their own. Emily looked up at one point and asked, "Do you think I'll be a good mom?" Helen didn't hesitate. "You already are." Then she added, "And I think I'll be a much better grandmother than I was a mother. Thanks to you." As night blanketed the house, the last thing they did was place the two handmade shirts into the crib, side by side, like two tiny heartbeats waiting to begin their symphony. Chapter 13. When Life Holds Its Breath. The pain came suddenly sharp, low, and insistent. Emily had just stood up from the couch to answer a phone call when her legs buckled beneath her. A twisting pressure bloomed in her lower abdomen, stealing her breath. Her hand flew to her belly. "Not now," she whispered, panic rising. Helen heard the thud of her fall before the scream. She raced from the kitchen and found Emily crumpled on the floor, one arm clutching the coffee table, the other wrapped tightly around her belly. It hurts," Emily gasped. "Something's wrong." Helen didn't wait. She grabbed her phone, dialed 911 with one hand, and held Emily's with the other. Her voice steadier than she felt. "Stay with me. Just breathe. Help is coming." The emergency room was cold and bright. Emily lay pale and trembling on the hospital bed. In drip snaking into her arm. Nurses moved quickly, voices low and urgent. Helen sat beside her, one hand never leaving Emily's. After an ultrasound and hours of monitoring, the doctor finally returned. "Both babies are okay," she said. "But this was a threatened miscarriage. She needs complete rest, no stress, no movement, no lifting. We'll keep her overnight." Helen let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Emily blinked up at her, eyes wet. "I thought I lost them." Helen bent forward, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You didn't. They're holding on. And so are you." That night, while Daniel rushed back from a business trip in another city, Helen stayed. She refused to leave Emily's side. She helped her drink water, fluffed her pillow, held her hand when the cramps returned, and hummed softly when Emily cried in her sleep. At 3 a.m., when the world had quieted and the monitors beeped steadily in the dark, Emily whispered, "I'm scared." Helen, sitting in the corner chair, looked up. "So am I." Emily turned her head. "I wanted to be strong, but I don't know if I can go through this again." Helen stood and walked over, her voice softer than it had ever been. "You don't have to be strong alone." Emily's lip trembled. "You hated me when I first came here." Helen shook her head. "No. I feared you. I feared what you'd change, what you'd reveal in me." She sat on the edge of the bed, took Emily's hand again. "I lost a child once, long before Daniel. And I thought if I ever loved too much again, I'd break. So I hardened. I closed doors I should have opened." Helen's eyes filled. "But you kept knocking, even when I gave you nothing. And now you're more than just my son's wife. You're my daughter." Tears streamed down Emily's cheeks. She clutched Helen's hand tightly. "I needed to hear that." Helen leaned in and kissed her forehead gently. "Then let this be the moment you remember. Not the pain, not the fear, but this. You are not alone. Not now, not ever again." Outside, the hospital lights flickered quietly. Inside, two women, mother and daughter by something deeper than blood, sat in stillness, anchored not by duty, but by love forged through fire. And deep within Emily's womb, two tiny heartbeats kept beating, steady and sure, like the echo of forgiveness. Chapter 14. A Blessing in the Quiet. 2 days later, Emily returned home. The house felt different. Not just quieter, but reverent, almost sacred. Daniel carried her gently into the living room, as though every step risked disturbing the fragile miracle growing inside her. Helen had transformed the downstairs guest room into a soft haven, ivory curtains to filter the light, fresh lavender in a small ceramic vase, and a plush, reclining chair beside the bed. On the nightstand were ginger candies, prenatal vitamins, and a handwritten schedule taped to the lamp. Medication, hydration, rest, repeat. You really didn't have to do all this, Emily whispered. Overwhelmed. Helen smiled. I really did. For the first few days, Emily barely moved. Helen and Daniel took turns watching over her. She was only allowed to stand to use the bathroom, and even then, Helen insisted on walking with her. Meals came in on trays. Warm cloths for her hands, foot massages with unscented oil. Helen made her drink herbal teas every 4 hours, all brewed precisely. Then, on the 6th morning after returning home, Helen entered the room holding a small basket filled with folded linens, candles, and 2 tiny crocheted booties. What's this? Emily asked. Helen looked almost shy. I thought, maybe we could do something special. A little blessing. Emily blinked. Like a ceremony? Helen nodded. Not religious. Just something quiet. For them. For you. That afternoon, Helen set up the living room with careful grace. She placed 2 white candles on the coffee table, surrounded by little flowers from the backyard, hydrangeas, baby's breath, and lavender. She brought out a framed sonogram print and propped it beside a small bowl of water with floating mint leaves. Daniel came downstairs and, seeing the setup, wrapped his arm around Emily. Mom, this is beautiful. I wanted to welcome them. Even before they arrive, Helen said. To let them know they're safe. And that they are already surrounded by love. Emily sat in her reclining chair, eyes glistening. Helen stood beside her and gently placed one hand on her belly. We don't know your names yet, she said softly. But we know your souls. You've already shown us strength and grace. Today, we bless your coming with light, rest, and joy. Daniel knelt beside Emily and placed a hand over hers. I can't wait to meet you, he whispered. I don't care if you keep us up all night or cry through every diaper change. You're already the best thing that's ever happened to us. Emily took a shaky breath. I used to think that family was something you were born into. But now I know it's something you build. And this is ours. Helen lit the candles, their flames flickering gently in the afternoon light. Then, in the stillness, they bowed their heads. No grand prayers. No dramatic speeches. Just the quiet, powerful presence of 3 people binding their hearts to 2 lives not yet seen. Afterward, Helen handed Emily the crocheted booties. I made these when I was pregnant with Claire, she said. I've kept them all these years. I'd like your babies to have them. Emily held them in trembling hands. Are you sure? Helen nodded. I made them with love. And now they'll be worn with love. That night, as the candles melted into soft stubs and the stars blinked awake beyond the windows, the house didn't just feel like a home. It felt like sanctuary. Chapter 15. When life kicks back. It was just after lunch on a golden Sunday afternoon when it happened. Emily was lying on her side in the recliner by the window, a blanket draped over her legs. The soft lull of birdsong outside lulling her into a half-doze. A paperback novel rested on her belly, forgotten. Her hands folded gently across the small rise where 2 tiny lives quietly made their home. And then, a flutter, like the brush of a butterfly wing against the inside of her skin. She froze. It came again. Stronger this time. A definite shift. A press outward. Her breath caught. Daniel, she called out, half laughing, half crying. Helen. They both came running, Daniel from the kitchen. Helen from the garden. Seeing her wide-eyed and breathless, they rushed to her side. What's wrong? Daniel asked urgently. Emily shook her head, eyes shining. Nothing's wrong. It's them. I felt them. Helen blinked. You mean? Emily nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. They moved. Daniel fell to his knees beside her, placing his hand gently on her belly. "Where?" Emily guided him. "Here. Just wait." Seconds passed. Then, a faint bump like a small heartbeat beneath his palm. Daniel gasped. "That's them?" Emily giggled through her tears. "That's them." Helen stood still, hands clasped tightly, as if afraid to ask. Emily turned to her. "Do you want to feel, too?" Helen hesitated. "Are you sure?" Emily nodded. "I want you to." Gently, carefully. Helen knelt down and placed her hand beside Daniel's. For a moment, nothing. Then, a kick, firm, insistent, as if to say, "I'm here." Helen's eyes welled with tears. She laughed, a surprised, breathless sound. "Oh, my." Emily watched her, heart full. "You okay?" Helen wiped at her eyes. "I don't think I've felt something this real in a long, long time." She rested her hand there a moment longer, eyes closed, whispering something no one else heard. Then she looked up. "I used to think I'd done everything I could to protect my family," she said. "But love isn't protection, is it? It's presence. It's being here for the kicks and the cries and everything in between." Daniel smiled, his arm draped around Emily. "You're here now, Mom. That's what matters." That evening, the three of them sat around the dinner table with the window open, letting in the soft breeze. They didn't talk about the future in big, scary terms. They just talked about baby names, who they thought the twins might look like, and whether they'd end up sharing a birthday or coming on different days. Just to be dramatic, Emily joked. And as laughter filled the kitchen, mingling with the scent of roasted carrots and lemon rice, it was hard to believe this house had ever been cold. It now pulsed with life, with forgiveness, with new beginnings, and with the tiny, steady thrum of two little feet kicking their way into the world. Chapter 16. Preparing for the storm. The calendar on the kitchen wall now had red circles around 3 consecutive dates. March 10th. March 11th. March 12th. Just in case, Helen had said, marking them all. Twins don't always follow the rules. Emily, now in her 34th week of pregnancy, moved through the house like a slow tide, graceful but deliberate, her belly a soft and sacred weight. Her ankles were swollen, her back ached, and sleep had become a negotiation. But her heart was louder than ever. "Do you ever feel like your body isn't just yours anymore?" she asked one afternoon, lying on the sofa with a heating pad behind her. Helen, who was folding tiny bibs into neat piles, smiled knowingly. Motherhood begins long before the baby arrives. And it never really ends. Daniel, pacing the hallway with a checklist in hand, called out, "We're low on diapers." Again. "There are 80 in the closet," Helen replied without missing a beat. "Still low," he muttered. They all laughed. But beneath the warm rhythm of preparation, there was tension. Emily felt it in her bones, an invisible ticking clock. Every shift in pressure, every unfamiliar ache sent her mind racing. "What if something goes wrong?" she whispered to Helen one evening, her hand resting protectively over her belly. "What if I can't do it?" Helen didn't dismiss her fears. She sat beside her and took her hand, fingers firm and steady. "You're allowed to be scared," she said. "Being brave doesn't mean being fearless. It means showing up, tired, terrified, swollen ankles, and all." Emily looked away, blinking tears. "I don't want to lose them." Helen's grip tightened. "You won't. And even if the world throws everything it can at us, you won't face it alone." She leaned over and pressed a soft kiss to Emily's temple. "I've already lost one child. I won't let anything happen to yours." That night, Daniel finished installing the baby monitors, checking them twice. Helen packed the hospital bags with surgical precision. 3 changes of clothes for Emily, 2 blankets for the babies, snacks, phone chargers, an extra toothbrush for herself. She even wrote a checklist on the fridge titled, "When it's time, grab car keys. Call doctor. Bring Emily's pillow. Don't panic," underlined twice. On the final Saturday of February, Helen surprised Emily with something small but deeply personal, a hand-sewn hospital gown. It opens in the back, but also the sides, she explained, holding it up. So you can hold them skin to skin the moment they arrive. Emily ran her fingers along the soft fabric, gray with delicate little stars stitched at the collar. I don't deserve you, she whispered. Helen cupped her face. We're beyond earning and deserving now, don't you think? This is love. It just is. They held each other for a long moment, two women from different generations, now bound by the oldest story in the world, the arrival of new life. And as the final days of waiting drew near, and the house fell into its quiet, anticipatory hush, Emily whispered to the swell of her belly each night. Not long now, my loves. Not long at all. Chapter 17. When the clock struck early. It was 2:47 a.m. The house was silent, except for the soft hum of the baby monitor Daniel had set up to track Emily's rest downstairs. Helen was just drifting into sleep when she heard it, a sound too sharp to be a dream. A gasp, then a cry, then her name. Helen. She bolted upright, heart pounding. Within seconds, she was rushing down the hallway, her robe trailing behind her. She found Emily curled forward on the guest room bed, one hand gripping the sheets, the other clutching her belly. It's happening, Emily said, voice breathless and scared. Too early. It's too early. Helen's eyes shot to the clock. 35 weeks. Still premature, but not dangerously so. She moved fast. Stay calm. I'm waking Daniel. Don't leave me. Helen sat on the edge of the bed, gripping Emily's hand tight. I won't. I promise. Daniel stumbled in minutes later, shirt inside out, hair wild, keys in one hand, phone in the other. Car's ready. Let's go. Helen helped Emily up, supporting her with practiced hands. Breathe slow, just like we practiced. The drive to the hospital was a blur of red lights and quiet moans. Emily leaned against Helen in the back seat, eyes closed, whispering through clenched teeth. They're not ready. Helen brushed damp hair from her forehead. But you are. At the hospital. A nurse wheeled Emily into the maternity ward while Daniel signed papers. Helen stayed by her side the entire time, translating the chaos into calm, asking questions, adjusting pillows, telling the nurse about Emily's previous scare and the twins' last ultrasound. Soon, Emily was changed into the soft gray gown Helen had sewn, the one with the stars. They have to monitor me for a bit, Emily said, voice thin. You'll be fine, Helen whispered. You're going to meet them soon. But what if? No what ifs. Just hold on to me. You've got this. The minutes turned into an hour. Then another. The doctor came in with a kind face and careful words. They're coming. Not right this second, but today. We'll monitor the contractions closely. Twins often make their own rules. Emily nodded weakly. Helen offered to go home and bring the hospital bag. But Daniel, seeing the look in Emily's eyes, shook his head. I'll go. You stay. So Helen stayed. She held Emily's hand as contractions crested and fell. She fetched ice chips, whispered stories, even hummed a lullaby she hadn't sung in decades, one she once reserved for the baby she'd lost, now offering it as comfort to the daughter she'd found. At one point, Emily looked up at her. Sweat on her brow, tears in her eyes. Do you think I'll be a good mother? Helen didn't hesitate. I think you already are. Emily squeezed her hand. I'm scared of the pain. Helen leaned closer. Then let it know you're stronger. Another contraction came, sharp and deep. Emily cried out, her whole body tensing. Helen steadied her. Breathe. In through your nose. Out through your mouth. I'm right here. The pain passed. Emily slumped back, exhausted. I wish my mom were here. She is, Helen whispered, placing her hand gently over Emily's chest. Right here. And she'd be proud beyond words. As dawn broke, casting gold into the hospital room, the doctor returned. It's time. Helen stood, trembling slightly now. Daniel's almost back. I'll wait outside when he arrives. Emily caught her wrist. No. I want you in the room. Helen blinked. Are you sure? Tears brimmed in Emily's eyes. I wouldn't want to do this without you. Helen nodded, heart thudding, and whispered, then I'll be right beside you. And as the nurses moved with quiet urgency, prepping the room for birth, two women, one giving life, one bearing witness, gripped hands across generations, preparing to welcome not just babies, but a new chapter in all of their lives. Chapter 18. Two Cries. One Heart. The delivery room glowed under soft lights, hushed voices, and beeping monitors. Outside, the sky shifted from pale gray to dawn's first pink. Emily lay on the hospital bed, pale but fierce, her hands gripping the side rails. Sweat dripped down her temple. Her hair clung to her face. Her eyes, though tired, burned with something primal, courage laced with fear, strength rooted in love. Helen stood at her right, one hand resting gently over Emily's as she whispered encouragements in a steady, unwavering voice. On her left, Daniel held her other hand, his face a mixture of awe, terror, and love so vast it seemed to pulse through the sterile air. The doctor nodded. We're ready. Emily, on the next contraction, I want you to push. Emily nodded, teeth clenched. The pain came like a wave, deep, raw, unrelenting. Now, the doctor said. Emily screamed, body arching, every muscle straining. Helen squeezed her hand, grounding her. You're doing it. Helen whispered. You're bringing them home. One more push, Emily. You can do this. Daniel's voice cracked. And then, a cry. High, sharp, unmistakably new. Emily collapsed back, sobbing, laughing all at once. It's a boy, the nurse said, holding up a tiny, slippery, red-faced baby, his mouth wide open in protest at this new, bright world. Emily reached out instinctively. Is he okay? He's perfect, the doctor said. We're not done yet, Mama. Baby number 2's coming. Emily, trembling, nodded. I can do this. Helen leaned down and kissed her forehead. You already are. 10 minutes later, the second wave came, just as strong. Push, the doctor said. Emily screamed again, voice hoarse but full of fire. Another cry broke the air softer, higher. A girl. The nurse announced. And she's just as loud. Emily sobbed, chest shaking. They're here. They're here. Daniel's face was soaked with tears as he looked at both babies in awe. I don't know how to breathe. Helen smiled, her own eyes glassy. Then just be still. Let them teach you. The nurses placed both babies on Emily's chest, two tiny, wrinkled bundles with wobbly fists and searching lips. The boy nestled close to her heartbeat. The girl blinked once, then curled a foot under her brother's side. Emily looked down, a soundless gasp leaving her lips. She laughed through tears, brushing a finger across each forehead. Hi, she whispered. Welcome home. Daniel kissed her damp hair. You did it. Helen, still standing beside them, reached out with reverence and laid a trembling hand on the babies' backs. They're so small, she murmured. And yet so complete. One of the twins, no one could say which, gripped her finger tightly. Helen choked back a sob. The doctor stepped back, smiling. We'll give you a moment. And in that moment, the room stilled. For people, one breath, one new world. Emily looked up at Helen. Would you like to hold them? Helen's eyes widened. I'd be honored. Very gently. Daniel helped lift the baby girl into Helen's arms. She cradled the child close, as if she'd done it yesterday, not 32 years ago. The baby's cries quieted at her chest. Hello, little one. She whispered. I'm your grandmother. And I've waited a long, long time to meet you. Then the baby boy was passed to her free arm. Two tiny souls, warm and alive. I never thought my heart could feel full again, she whispered. But here it is. Emily watched the scene before her. Daniel, wiping away tears. Helen, rocking the twins, herself. Exhausted but whole. She reached for Daniel's hand and held it tight. This is our family, she whispered. Daniel nodded. And it's perfect. And as the sun finally broke through the window, spilling golden light across cribs and blankets and a family remade, two tiny cries rose once more, not in protest, but in song. Chapter 19. Nights of quiet strength. The days after the birth blurred together in a haze of feeding schedules, diaper changes, and sleepless nights. Emily found herself a stranger to her own body, exhausted, aching, but utterly devoted. Each cry from her twins tugged at her heart, but also frayed her nerves. She struggled to remember which one was hungry, which one needed a diaper change, which one simply wanted to be held. Helen never left her side. At 2 a.m., when the world outside was dark and silent, Helen was there, softly humming a lullaby as she gently rocked the baby girl in her arms, calming her cries. When Emily's hands trembled as she tried to soothe the boy, Helen's steady fingers guided hers, showing her how to hold him just right. Don't worry if you don't get it perfect, Helen whispered one night. Babies don't come with instruction manuals. Emily smiled tiredly, tears prickling her eyes. I'm scared I'm not good enough. Helen shook her head gently. You're already more than good enough. You're their mother. Days turned into weeks. The hospital visits became less frequent. The twins grew stronger, their cries more confident. Helen and Emily shared moments of quiet companionship in the nursery, folding tiny clothes, sharing stories about Daniel's childhood, and laughing softly when a baby's unexpected sneeze startled them both. One afternoon, Emily confided, I don't think I could have done this without you. Helen smiled, brushing a stray lock of hair behind Emily's ear. We're in this together. You, me, and these two little miracles. And in the small hours of the morning, when Emily felt overwhelmed, Helen would remind her softly, you are never alone. Through the exhaustion and uncertainty, through the joy and challenges, they were no longer just mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. They were family. Chapter 20. Full Circle. The sun poured through the nursery window, casting soft golden light across the room filled with tiny clothes, colorful toys, and two cribs standing side by side, homes for the newest members of the Carter family. Emily sat in the rocking chair, cradling the baby boy close to her chest while Daniel gently rocked their daughter in his arms. The house was finally filled with the laughter, cries, and quiet breaths of family. Helen stood nearby, watching them with a warmth that made her eyes glisten. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she stepped forward and took Emily's hand. Emily, Helen began, her voice thick with emotion, you have changed this house. You have changed me. Emily looked up, heart pounding. You arrived here not just as my son's wife, but as the daughter I never knew I needed. You carried more than children. You carried forgiveness, patience, and love. Helen squeezed Emily's hand gently. I know now what true family means. Emily's eyes brimmed with tears. I was so afraid I'd never be accepted. Helen smiled softly. You were accepted long before you knew it. You just had to believe it. She turned to the babies, then back to Emily. From now on, I promise to be not just your mother-in-law, but your mother in every way that counts. Emily's tears fell freely now. Daniel wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. Helen looked at her grandchildren, their tiny fingers curling around each other, and whispered, You are the miracle that healed us all. The room filled with a quiet, joyful peace, an ending and a beginning all at once.